Ethan Wallace clenched his boarding pass with unnecessary force, his pulse quickening though he couldn't pinpoint why. It was supposed to be a routine flight, Boston to San Francisco, a journey meant for joy, not conflict. Yet, as he slid into seat 14C, an inexplicable sense of dread settled over him, like a warning whispered just beneath the roar of the engines. What he didn't realize was that in less than an hour, his claim to that seat would be questioned. Not by an airline mistake, not by an upgrade dispute, but by something far more unsettling. It would start as a harmless request, wrapped in polite words. Then, it would shift, an expectation masked as a favor. A flight attendant's authority would morph into an ultimatum. And in that moment, Ethan would be forced to make a decision no traveler should ever have to face. Relinquish his seat to avoid conflict or stand his ground and risk chaos at 30,000 feet. This was one of those defining moments, a flight, a standoff, and a single choice that sent shockwaves through the entire cabin. Stay with us, because by the time the plane touched down, nothing would be the same. Ethan leaned back, exhaling as the hum of the aircraft filled the cabin. This trip was supposed to be a reset, a brief escape to support his sister, Claire, at her photography showcase, and to clear his mind from the weight of endless job applications. But something about this flight felt off. Across the aisle, his best friend, Mara, jammed her overstuffed tote beneath the seat, muttering under her breath. "I swear I didn't overpack," she grumbled, though the frustration in her voice had little to do with her bag and everything to do with the painful breakup she was trying to forget. Ethan smirked, knowing she was trying to keep things light. Maybe he was too. But whatever fragile sense of normalcy they clung to shattered the moment Eleanor Drake stepped onto the plane. She carried herself with an air of entitlement, her designer coat draped over her shoulders like a royal mantle. The moment her gaze landed on Ethan's seat, a cold, sinking feeling settled in his stomach. She didn't hesitate. With a simple flick of her hand, she summoned a flight attendant, Mark Reynolds, whose polished uniform did little to disguise the reluctance in his expression. "She needs this seat," Eleanor announced smoothly. Mark approached with the forced politeness of someone already exhausted by the interaction. Eleanor claimed her assigned seat was further back, too cramped, too inconvenient. Ethan tensed. The familiar, silent pressure to comply, to avoid making waves, was creeping in. But he wasn't moving. "I booked this seat," he replied, voice calm but firm. "I'm staying put." Eleanor's expression barely changed, but a sharpness flickered in her eyes. Mark hesitated, as if expecting Ethan to cave. When he didn't, Eleanor's voice lost its warmth. "I paid extra for a premium seat," she countered. "I shouldn't have to sit in discomfort." The words carried a weight she likely didn't even recognize. Because this wasn't just about legroom. It never was. Mara sensed it too. Her grip tightened around the armrest, a quiet signal that she was bracing for what came next. Eleanor wasn't looking at Ethan like just another passenger. She was looking at him like someone who should already know their place. Mark shifted uneasily. "Sir, I'm asking you to consider moving." "Consider?" Ethan asked, his voice steady. "Or are you insisting?" Before Mark could answer, another flight attendant, Naomi Ellis, stepped forward, her expression unreadable but her tone firm. "We can't make a move," she reminded her colleague. Eleanor's hand clenched around the strap of her bag. "Then put him somewhere else." The murmurs around them grew louder. A man a row behind them lowered his book. Another passenger adjusted their seat, watching. The tension pressed in from all sides. Mark squared his shoulders. "Sir, I'd really advise cooperating." Ethan's breath was shallow now. He'd heard this tone before. He knew what would happen if he didn't comply. "I have every right to be in this seat," he said. Naomi stepped in again, offering Eleanor a compromise. Another aisle seat a few rows back. Predictably, she scoffed. "Absolutely not." The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Mara, heart pounding, reached for her phone, her fingers moving rapidly across the screen. Ethan wasn't sure who she was messaging, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't giving up his seat. "Here's your rewritten version," keeping the new setting and unique flow intact. That's when Mark shifted his strategy. "You can either switch seats, or we'll need to escort you off the plane." The cabin fell into a tense, suffocating silence. Mara's breath hitched, her fingers tightening around her phone. Passengers stirred, their gazes flickering between Ethan and the flight crew, unsure whether to intervene or pretend they saw nothing. So this was where it led, and Ethan knew exactly how moments like this usually played out. Naomi stiffened at Mark's words, her lips parting as if to object, but before she could, Mara stood. Her voice was steady, but steel ran beneath it. "Let him go, Ethan," she said. "Let him speak to someone with actual authority." Eleanor's lips curled into a knowing smirk. But she wasn't prepared for what happened next. Out in the jet bridge, Mark's confidence wavered the moment Mara lifted her phone. "I'm recording," she announced, her voice unwavering. "And I've already sent the details to someone who can actually do something about this." Mark hesitated. "That's not necessary." And there was the shift, the flicker of realization in his eyes. He had pushed too far, and he knew it. Naomi pulled him aside, her whispered words sharp and deliberate. Mark's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Eleanor, arms crossed tightly over her chest, glared as the captain finally arrived. Captain Reynolds, a seasoned pilot with a sharp but measured gaze, took in the scene. He listened, not just to Mark, not just to Eleanor, but to Ethan. His verdict? Eleanor had no right to demand Ethan's seat. Mark had overstepped. Ethan was staying. Eleanor's expression darkened, her carefully maintained composure slipping. The younger man beside her, her son, Ethan assumed, shifted uncomfortably before muttering, "Mom, let's just sit down." She shot him a withering glare. But the fight was over. As Ethan and Mara returned to their seats, quiet murmurs of support rippled through the cabin. The man behind them gave Ethan a small nod. Naomi, maintaining her professional mask, paused beside him for a moment. A quiet, well-handled, before she moved on. Eleanor was seated just one row behind them, her anger radiating in thick, suffocating waves. But for once it didn't matter. The flight took off. The tension didn't dissolve. But Ethan had won. Midway through the journey, Eleanor pressed the call button. Mark appeared, bending slightly as she whispered, her sharp gaze cutting toward Ethan. Moments later, Mark returned, this time with a notepad. "I need your name and contact information," he said, his tone polite but forced. "Just standard procedure." Mara leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "Or what?" Mark's lips thinned. "It's protocol for disputes." Ethan met his stare evenly. "Or when someone's trying to change the story," because he could see it happening, the slow, careful twisting of facts. The attempt to paint Eleanor as the wrong party and Ethan as the problem. By the time the wheels touched down, the battle wasn't over. Eleanor made her final move, whispering something to Mark before storming off the plane. And just when Ethan thought it was done, his phone buzzed. An official complaint had been filed against him. Eleanor had flipped the script. But what she didn't expect, Ethan wasn't backing down. And neither was Mara. If this moment strikes a chord, share it. No one should ever have to stand alone in situations like this.